Chapter 4 The First Adams. Keep in mind the big question: why was John Adams an unpopular president? A new president. Twice the American people had chosen George Washington to be their president. Twice he had served, even though he would rather have returned to his beloved Mount Vernon. If the Americans had their way, Washington would go right on serving as president. Washington, however, decided that 8 years as president was enough. Not just enough for him, but enough for the country. He believed that if the new government was to succeed, the people must not depend on just one man. America needed a president, not a king. Once again, Washington voluntarily surrendered power back to the Republic and the people. He returned to his home at Mount Vernon. In doing this, he set the precedent of presidents serving only 2 terms in office. This was not a constitutional rule, but a moral precedent that was intended to prevent a return of being ruled by a monarch. Presidents followed Washington's example for 140 years. With Washington out of the picture, the United States had its first real contest for presidency. John Adams, who had been Washington's vice president, was the candidate of the Federalist Party. The Democratic Republicans named Thomas Jefferson as their choice for president. John Adams won, but just barely. In those days, the person who came in second became the vice president, even though he might be from the other political party. So Thomas Jefferson became vice president of the United States. This method of election was soon changed by the 12th Amendment to the Constitution. John Adams was a greatly respected American, but he was not as loved as Washington. He was not especially popular. While he was president, he had to make a decision that made him even less popular, but it was the right decision for the country. The problem had actually begun while Washington was still president. Those old enemies, France and Great Britain, were back at war again. During the U.S. War for Independence, France had become America's best friend. The French Navy and Army had made possible the victory at Yorktown, which ended the war. Now the French thought it was America's turn to help them fight Great Britain. Some Americans agreed. Many favored France because the French people had just had a revolution of their own. They had overthrown their king and set up a republic. Many of the Americans who wanted to help France were Democratic Republicans. Other Americans, however, thought the United States should side with Great Britain. Most people who felt this way were Federalists. President Washington decided that the United States must remain neutral, which means it would not take sides. It would stay out of the fighting. Even when the British Navy began to seize American ships and sailors carrying goods to France, Washington was determined to keep the United States out of war. He knew that the young nation needed time to grow and become stronger. He feared that war might destroy the modern world's first great experiment with Republican government. John Adams also believed it was important to keep the United States out of war. However, by the time he became president, it was even more difficult. By then, the French Navy had also started seizing the ships of American merchants. At the same time, the French government was threatening the United States. President Adams hoped to keep America at peace. He sent 3 personal representatives to France to ask the French to stop. But French officials insisted on a large loan to France before they could even talk to the Americans. The Americans returned empty-handed and angry. In response to the French, Congress created a Navy department and paid for the building of a number of ships. It looked like war, for sure. President Adams knew that taking military action would make him popular. But like President Washington before him, he also knew that the young republic needed peace. He decided he must try once more to find another solution. He sent a new ambassador to France. This time, the French government talked with the American ambassador. The two reached an agreement. President Adams had done the right thing. He had kept America out of a war. But in doing so, he had lost a lot of popular support. Federalists who had wanted to go to war turned against him. Democratic Republicans were not going to support him anyway. President Adams was also involved in a battle about the power of the federal government. He signed a series of laws that made it more difficult for foreigners to become American citizens. It also became a crime to criticize the government. These laws were unpopular among Democratic Republicans. Adams found himself in a very difficult situation.